It's time for another episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas, the podcast covering the intersection of business, culture, entrepreneurship, and life in general here in the Ozarks. Whether you are considering a move to this area or trying to learn more about the place you call home, we've got something special for you. Here's our host, Randy Wilburn.
Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn. Excited to be with you as always. I'm sitting here in the Furman Garner Performance Studio at KUAF, the public radio station here in Northwest Arkansas. So excited to have partnered up with these guys. You hear me talk about it all the time, but I just have to mention it again. As long as I'm going to do this podcast, I'm going to hopefully partner up, or as long as they'll have me, I'll partner up with KUAF and we'll be able to do some fun things together. But it's just nice to be able to extend the conversations that I have on this podcast on to Ozarks at large. And so our episodes are typically featured every Tuesday at both 12 noon and at 7 p.m. And I'm even told that I think that the show airs in Little Rock as well. So we're getting a lot of coverage, which is very cool. But today's episode is really special. One of the things that I wanted to do as we come upon our 5-year anniversary here with I Am Northwest Arkansas is to celebrate those that have transplanted or found themselves in Northwest Arkansas for one reason or another. You've all heard my story. Again, this podcast was the one that I would have wanted to listen to when I first moved here in 2014, but it didn't exist. So in 2019, I created it. And here we are 5 years later, still having these same conversations about the intersection of business, culture, entrepreneurship, and life here in the Ozarks. And so part of this, what I'm calling a Transplant to NWA series, it is and will feature several individuals, couples and individuals that have relocated and now call Northwest Arkansas home, and just learn a little bit more about why they decided to call this place home and what is so special about the Ozarks. And I think it's important because people move around for different reasons. Sometimes it's for work. I mean, we've got this little company up the road, begins with a W. I think it's Walmart. That's right. So Fortune 1. And we've got JB Hunt. We have Tyson, Simmons Food. We have, you name it. We have a lot of companies right here in our own backyard. And so there is a number of economic reasons to move to Northwest Arkansas. But then there are also familial reasons to move to Northwest Arkansas. Some people want a slower pace of life. And, one of my goals with this podcast is to really paint a picture for what this area is like, especially for the uninitiated that have not come here yet, or maybe have visited, but still are trying to get a grasp on if this area is okay. Maybe they want to know. They're like me and they're African American and they want to know what's life going to be like for me here in Northwest Arkansas. Well, I'm here to tell you I've got a body of work that can speak to that. And certainly I've had a great experience since I've been here. No place is perfect. Let me put that out there. And I've lived all over the world, but I really enjoy Northwest Arkansas, and I am willing to, I'm all in, if you will, if I can use a gambling expression. I'm on the table and I'm all in because I feel like this is the kind of place that I can call home for a very long time. And it's the kind of place where I'm connected with other people that feel as strongly as I do about Northwest Arkansas. And one of those individuals is sitting here before me. And the funny story, and I think you guys will really appreciate this, that James Hawkins and I met probably right after I moved here with my wife, Nicola, and 3 boys. And the crazy thing is that my wife, Nicola, met James's wife, whose also name is Nicola. It's crazy. And it is. And so I'm really excited. And I can't believe it took me this long to have this brother on the podcast, but he's here today and we are going to chop it up. So without further ado, and that is one of the longest preambles that I've put out there, I want to welcome James Hawkins, who is a friend. He's also the clinical coordinator for the Joshua Center. He is a therapist. This is going to be a wide-ranging conversation. And so I hope you strap in and get prepared. So, James, how are you doing?
Man, I am doing great, Randy. I'm happy to be here since I heard you doing this idea. This is the podcast I would have wanted.
Right.
This is the podcast. I think not just my family that moved here with me, my family who was, kind of like heard we're moving to Arkansas. And they're like, excuse me?
Yeah.
Come again?
Why?
Where are you going?
Yeah.
And, when I think a lot of Black people think about Arkansas, once again, I love all of the Ozarks, right?
Yep.
But they go to the old time of Harrison.
Yeah.
And they were like,
or
wait,
Elaine.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The massacres. And they're like, excuse me, come again? And I wish I would have had this podcast for me and also for them to put grandparents' nerves at ease.
Yes.
And I love what you're doing. I think what you're doing really captures the heart of this community. And I don't know if anyone's told you, Randy, but thank you for doing what you're doing.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're looking forward to, for the longest time, I actually wasn't going to celebrate the 5 years, but I've gotten to a place now and an age where every day should be celebrated. I don't think that idea of delaying and celebrating at some point in time in the distant future or in the near future, that may not come. And so I try to give, as they say, give people their flowers while they can still smell them. And this is not necessarily a flower for me, but really I want to celebrate all the people that allowed me to tell their stories. And basically my whole idea was that I want to create a platform and then share it with as many people as possible. So I'm here sharing it with you today. And so I'd love for you just to give our audience a little bit of your, as I like to call it, a superhero origin story, a little bit of your background and what got you to this place today, because you've had an interesting life. You served our country. I mean, so I certainly would love for you just to kind of tell our audience who James Hawkins is.
Wow, I like that, man. You're making me go back as a counselor right now. You want me to tell my attachment history?
And I always joke with people. I'm like, man, you can go back to the womb, or you can go back to fifth grade. You can go back to that fight you had in high school that just changed the trajectory of your life, whatever you want. And I'm being facetious, but I mean.
But I like that you asked that, Randy. I think, this is me being the counselor a little bit. Like with my clients, I'm interested in, I need to know the story that led to who you are in front of me today, to get the backdrop. So for me, I would say it starts with just remember even my mom and dad divorced when I was 3. I remember the car ride as we were leaving at that time, Illinois, to go live with my grandparents in Michigan. I love growing up in that little town of Michigan. At the time, Detroit was still booming. There were factories. That's where my granddad worked. My grandmother was a CNA. They moved from the South to try and give their family a better life. Seeing my uncle, who was he was a doctor himself, my aunt, uncle, just really working hard to make that dream come true of a Black family coming from the South and making their way. And that really shaped me as a little boy growing up and watching my aunts and my uncles and my mother and my grandmother, Queen Esther, and that's her name, Queen Esther, is so cool, right? And they just, that community of people just poured into me the dream that you can be anything you want to be. And they wouldn't accept anything less from me. And so that really pushed me and motivated me. But they were also honest with me about the realities and the truths of being a Black man in America. Not that they only just like, oh, the world's going to hate you. Like, hey, there are times you're going to have to work harder than your peers because just for whatever reason, people are just not going to believe that you can produce the same level of excellence. And so that really motivated me to do well in school, even when teachers tried to convince my mom to hold me back. And my mother was like, no, I know my son. I know what he's capable of. And she stood and she advocated for me. Then we moved to Pensacola, Florida, grew up there. And then that was a little bit of a shock for me going from the North to the South. I didn't blend in with the Black community as well in the South. I had the Yankee accent.
Yeah.
Coming from Michigan. But then the white community wanting to take me in. But then the Black community was like, you're a sellout if you do this. And so just really like, who am I and where do I belong? Went on, still did well in school, did well in high school. But after high school, I was scared to go to college for whatever reason. I went in the military, Air Force, excelled there, did really well for myself, got my GI Bill, got out, went to school and got my master's and PhD in psychology and counseling. Along the way, I met a very lovely and great woman. As my dad would say, she pulled you into greatness. And her name is Nicola.
You married up like I did.
For real. For real. And we've had 5 beautiful girls along the way.
Yes.
And so then we went to school in New Orleans. And then coming from New Orleans here to Northwest Arkansas was definitely a big cultural change for us. New Orleans, as during Katrina, the mayor, as Chocolate City.
Mm-hmm.
But New Orleans is full of culture. And New Orleans is one of those people, the culture and vibe of New Orleans. There is definitely race, but then there's a culture and vibe that transcends race within New Orleans. Whether you're Cajun, where do you get your king cake from?
Right.
where's your favorite beignets and where do you get your coffee? Like New Orleans defines on, who makes the best po' boy, like those kind of things. And it goes across cultural lines. And then there's just music and vibrations throughout the city that's just like, it's like a hum in the background constantly.
Yeah.
And you hear and see diversity everywhere. And then coming to Northwest Arkansas, when we did at the end of 2012, it was a little bit of a shock coming to Northwest Arkansas, but we have it. Like there's a lot of culture here in Northwest Arkansas, even then. So what I ran into in my job at that time, I worked with a lot of business leaders, the church community, but also I worked with what they identified themselves as the hillbilly community.
Yeah, yeah.
And they took me and my family into Northwest Arkansas and had us gardening and all these kind of things. And we tried all these hobbies and it's been great. And I remember one time talking with my wife and I said, hey, what if something happened to me? Where would you go? She said, we're staying here. And I asked my girls, I said, hey, if something happened to me, like, where'd y'all want to be? And they're like, here.
Right.
I was like, well, Northwest Arkansas is home now.
Yeah, yeah.
And we started making
that.
long-term plans, like to be in this community. And the change over time has been amazing. And we've loved it. And it's grown and expanded. And I'm just love seeing the cultural growth. And which is why I think your podcast is so important. You know, even I listened to your episode with Music Moves and I'm like, man, it's great to see them and what they're doing and what they're bringing to this area.
Yeah.
So.
It is awesome, man. And I just want to give a shout out that you guys do have a green thumb and your kale is on point. Because we've had some, and you know, I'm always asking Nicola, what's Nicola and what are those guys growing right now? Because you know, got to take advantage of that. But you know, I appreciate you sharing that because I've had some of those similar experiences as well, and I thought maybe it was just me, right? And I think one of the challenges is that, you know, in our country, in the U.S., and I don't really talk about this that much, but certainly race is an issue. But you know, when there are opportunities for people to see you for just who you are as a human being, and you're able to have those interactions, I've had a gajillion experiences like that here, right? And that's something that I've really been thankful for. And again, as I said earlier in the open, there's no place is perfect. But hey, listen, I'll put Northwest Arkansas up against any place when it comes to strong relations. I mean, people that are genuinely interested in you and want to see you succeed and want to support you. I have gained friends, even over the pandemic, that I never thought I would have befriended, but yet and still we're friends now, like legitimate friends where we check in on each other like on a regular basis. I was just out at dinner the other night. Shout out to Conifer. And I was up there seeing my friend, Chef Matt Cooper. And, you know, he gave me a hug. And it's like every time I see Matt, and we started out originally, he was on the podcast when he was at the Preacher's Son. And then, you know, we just stayed in contact and we just kept communicating with each other, having real conversation, not just like really trite things, just like real conversation. And that has evolved. And I can remember even during the pandemic, having some really, you know, major conversations with him while he was away from his family for a season, helping somebody else out during the pandemic. And, you know, I just showed me that I've actually built some really solid relationships here in Northwest Arkansas that mean everything to me, with people that don't look like me and with people that look like me. And so I'm very thankful for that. And that's, to me personally, that is part of what I think is the uniqueness of Northwest Arkansas. And again, yes, just like anywhere in the country right now, we are struggling with identity politics and a lot of other factors that play into how we treat each other. But I'd like to think that, especially here in Northwest Arkansas, we are trying to fight the good fight and create opportunities and chances for us to have open dialogue and conversation. So anyway, I'm off my soapbox now, but I concur with everything that you're saying about this area. And actually, my wife and I have had long conversations about, is this our last stop? And so I do like warm weather, even warmer than it gets here, believe it or not. But this is definitely, I see as a place that I could call my home base. So anything that I decide to do moving forward, I feel like, yeah, I could do it from Northwest Arkansas, meaning that maybe if I have a house down in Florida or down in Mexico or wherever, I don't know, you know, that this will always come. When I come back, I'll come back to this place.
Man, Randy, I tell you, in addition to my counseling at the Joshua Center, which I love, I get to also travel and train therapists really around the world. And I tell you, man, whether I was on the streets of New York and I'm just so used to Northwest Arkansas, people like the courtesy we extend, like to stop their car and let you drive, you know, let you walk across the walkway, or if you make eye contact, you say hello. We were in New York. I'm like, I love it. This is great. I'm ready to go back to Arkansas. I tell you, I land at XNA. I come out of that front door and I take a deep breath and say, I'm home.
Yep.
You know, I'm home.
Yeah, no, there's something about it. And, now I've gotten used to landing and seeing the cows on both sides of the plane and just being reminded. Because I remember the first time I came here, and again, I've talked about this. When I landed at XNA in 2014, I was like, where am I? And I remember getting in the rental car. And at that point in time, that whole area was not built up the way it is now. There's several subdivisions that were not even in existence. They were just trees and just one road into and out of the airport, which is continuing to expand. And I remember I made that first right-hand turn when I got to the end. There's now a fire station there, but I mean, there was nothing there before. And it was just like, wow, where am I? And I finally got to 49 and I was like, okay, I'm in civilization now. Here I am. And so that was my first interaction with Northwest Arkansas. Now, I don't even recognize what I saw. And so in a good way, right? Because the area is growing and I think we have to grow responsibly. We have to think about what placemaking looks like for the future of Northwest Arkansas, what we want it to be. And those are the things that I think that we have to consider and think about as we move forward.
Yeah, I agree with you. I appreciate our civic leaders, because part of Arkansas is, the natural state. And so I appreciate as we're growing, we're still trying to hold on to that as well.
Yeah.
Because I think that is a key marker of who we are. When we try and host conferences here for training, people are like, it's easy when I go to Vegas and New York or New Orleans, they just advertise the city to get people to come.
Sure.
And I'm like, hey, yes, Arkansas, doesn't have like these marquee names that have been historically, but I'm like, trust me, you'll appreciate it. And I tell you, some people come here, they're like, just the topography of Northwest Arkansas was relaxing for me.
Yeah.
And it was definitely a pleasant experience that surprised me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And now, again, with all the things that we have, Crystal Bridges, the Amazium, the Momentary, there's just so many aspects of Northwest Arkansas that are kind of putting us on par with a lot of other cities. And again, there's a reason why we're one of the fastest growing MSAs in the country. And, I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon. But what is going to be important is for everybody that's listening to this podcast that physically lives here now, it's going to be incumbent upon you to continue to write the story of what you want to see in Northwest Arkansas.
That's a good word, Randy. Like, y'all couldn't see me in the studio. You said two words, and this the counselor. When you said placemaking and the story you want to see.
Yeah.
And that's the part I hope we all work together. We have a beautiful opportunity right now in Northwest Arkansas. I'm even thinking about this from my seat as a therapist. Right now, I hope we are very intentional in writing the story together across socioeconomic lines, cultural lines, ethnic lines, gender lines, because right now we can shape a story that could well take us into the future in a very healthy, whole way. And part of what the struggle in America is not just, oh, you should let it go. It's we never had a time to write that story together well. When you think about it, you probably, I'm preaching to the choir here with you, but when you think about race in America, the time we had closest proximity was during slavery and then segregation. And we push everybody out to the margins and we all go away from each other during a time of trauma. And part of what the issue of trauma is, it gets stuck in the body of human beings. By the way, this isn't even a trauma story just for Black Americans. It's a trauma story for white Americans as well. If you want a good book to read on that, Resmaa Menakem's My Grandmother's Hands is a great book. And he talks about the trauma in all of our bodies. But now here we are, Randy, you're right. We are now back in proximity again. But now we've come back into proximity without really being able to deal with the story of the trauma that separated us in the first place. So now in Northwest Arkansas, we have an opportunity to really say, hey, we're in close proximity and we're forming new spaces, cultural kind of epicenters in a way. Even like Music Moves, putting their building where they did. I'm like, oh, that is wisdom, because you want someone like that. You want Reggie there, right, to an Anthony to kind of like, hey, here's music. Here's an opportunity to experience something different and new. So that way we can write this story together. So it can just go from the Black story, the white story, to this is our story.
Yeah. No, absolutely, man. Yeah, you are. You're putting it out there in the way that I think about it. I'd be curious to know, given the work that you're doing, and again, as a clinical coordinator with the Joshua Center, and I've talked with other people on this podcast about mental health in this day and age, because I think a lot of people are struggling with mental health issues. Some of it goes unchecked. Some of it is in check, if you will. And I'd love for you maybe just to kind of talk about what you're seeing in this day and age. In the year that we're recording this is 2024, but we still have a long way to go when it comes to combating mental health and how we deal with it. What are some of your thoughts, given what you've been able to experience here in Northwest Arkansas, about mental health and how people should view it and not struggle with some of the stigmas that can be attached to it that cause us to clam up and not say anything because we don't want anybody to think we're crazy or that we're going through something that everybody's probably going through. It's just not being spoken about.
Yeah, man, that's great.
And that's a lot, I know.
That's all right. I want to break it down in a couple of different ways. So what I'm seeing overall is really, I'll put it in one cultural camp. And one of those being we'll go with the entrepreneurship camp, kind of. And so what happens is it's the demands and busyness of life kind of take emotional or mental health and push it to the back burner. And so we end up in the idea of, I'm going to go back to something you said earlier about celebration. Let's say we tie it together. And I think we can live with this, but if I just get this done, then I'll have space to deal with it. Or if I accomplish this, I'll feel different. And the problem is it's just not true. And actually, the more we continue to push kind of like our emotional and mental health to the background, the more severe the need becomes and the more it begins to just kind of snowball and exacerbate on us. And so what I really see with people, if I want to help break the stigma in some ways, it's not that you have a disease all the time. I know people often think like, well, bipolar disease and depression and this and medication. What I see with a lot of people is your body was built and functions in a certain way. And when you don't treat it in that way, it begins to backfire. For example, this is a good Arkansas analogy. I have a friend, he raises cows. And one day his truck wasn't working. He needed to move the cows. So he hooked it up to his van and tried to pull the cows here in Northwest Arkansas. And you're going to eventually run into a hill. Well, that van wasn't built to carry that load over that sustained time. And he messed up his transmission. Often with mental health, that's what I think people are doing. They are trying to make their bodies carry a load for a sustained time that they're not supposed to do. And they're wearing out the transmission and they're blowing the engine. And then they bottom out. And then in that place, they already couldn't stop the productivity. And now when they see the productivity being threatened now because they can't function the way they want to keep up, then they really begin to double down on themselves. And they begin to say negative things about themselves and believe negative things about themselves. And then they don't want to let anyone see it. So then they begin to carry that burden alone. And then inside they're afraid that other people will see that they're maybe struggling to keep up. And then it keeps just compounding one step after another. So what I want to say in that way, it's, hey, every car needs to be serviced. And so do you. And sometimes it's just really about, for most people, they just need space to process what's going on inside of them, to get it out and give their body permission to pay attention to those emotional signals in them and to put out a good, clear signal to others so they can turn towards them and support them and be with them. And then most of the time, some of the symptomology that they begin to experience begins to either dissipate, or some people, they just go on, they're doing totally fine. Another area I want to talk about that, and you and I, off mic talked about, is in the Black community. And there has been a lot of change. I think there's, of course, the famous faces out there. The Obamas talking about going to counseling for their marriage. Many celebrities talk about their mental health now. But I still think there's a little bit of, but mental health has still been, who are you? And can I trust you? And the classic one is, I got to put all my business out there in the street. And it's not really about putting your business out there in the street. It's really about, hey, help me see you. And where do you get stuck at? And how can I help you? And I heard you on one of your podcasts with a great therapist. It's not also about you being crazy or broken and deficient. I have some clients that just really, they stay on my books just to say, James, this is my space where I can just totally let go. And I can feel like it's like almost like my massage therapy, except for my mental health. So what I'm seeing a lot now, though, Randy, is people just are busy and still coming out of the fog of COVID. And you can just feel like that emotional window of tolerance is a little bit smaller and a little bit less. And I would say it's not even just because of COVID. I think because of the stress and the tension in our political and kind of social environment that people just feel on edge, and it's wearing out the transmission, their mental health transmission in a way, and they're grinding the gears a little bit.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it really is. And I mean, that's a very, very good point that you made. And it's one of those things where, again, too often we're not able to diagnose the issues that we're struggling with. And so we go undiagnosed and we go with, a broken transmission, if you will, for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point, it's like, you can't even replace that. I mean, you have to replace it. It's like, you don't have a choice, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I think for us, it's always good to be in a place where you can have what I call healthy check-ins, just to let people know, hey, this is what's good. And it can totally, I totally get it. And even I reached out to you and I was like, yeah, when you're running and burning the candle on both ends and you feel like, oh, I'll eventually deal with this, or I'll, at some point in time, I'll open up to somebody and have those conversations. And it's like, no, you need to have those conversations now, because again, tomorrow isn't afforded to you. And it's important for you to get it out, because unfortunately, one of the other challenges of mental health that we don't talk about is how a lot of times mental health issues manifest themselves in other ailments that we end up getting. You hear somebody has a stroke, or I just had a brother-in-law that just had a stroke, and we're certainly praying for his complete 100% recovery, but he's also has gone through a lot. And, these are things that, you just can't ignore. And we've all had that family member that's kind of been there.
Yeah.
And we think, oh, well, it's just a medical issue. Oh, it's just that. And a lot of times there are other things that attach themselves to those outcomes that we chose to ignore or dismiss. And that's why I think now more than ever before, I'm encouraging people to get out and get among people where you can share how you're feeling, and especially get among trained individuals. Because again, there's one thing to talk to your boys or your sister circle and share what you're going through. And there's a place for that.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's another thing to talk with a trained ear, someone that can really hear you, right? I've talked a lot about active listening, and most of us struggle in that area of properly listening. And a trained counselor, a trained therapist, that's their job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I love what you're saying here. I think there's an aspect where I think about mental health and therapeutic environments. I think Northwest Arkansas is loaded with therapeutic environments. And you say, what do you mean? Me and my wife just went on Saturday and we walked at Mount Kessler. And I love that Northwest Arkansas has so many great free opportunities. We're looking out, or even out of your studio here. Look at this library and the setting that they've created. What we would say in mental, that's a therapeutic type environment, from the colors, the aesthetic, the sound, the feel, just the relaxation. All the social spots we've made here in Northwest Arkansas. I tell you, I go out and I might be at HFLOL Met, right? But you can see people having deep community conversations, and you see them hug each other and talk, and you see them, they're bearing their soul. I'm like, that's mental health happening right there. I think about all the many religious institutions we have here. Those are all a part of it. I think about my job as a mental health, which in my aspect of mental health, I do a lot of relational work with marriages and families. And some people say, well, what's different about you, James? I said, I'm that person who does sometimes what's socially awkward. And, when I'm out with my friends, and if they're going through a hard time, I am trained. And there's a spot where I'm like, I can see that my friend's saying they're okay, but I can see through that right now. Do I push the button and kind of keep pushing beyond that? Or do I let it go? I can tell you right now, as a mental health provider, I don't let it go. That's my time to say, hey, I hear you say you're doing well, but also I just see this heaviness in your eyes. I see this slump in your shoulders. So I hear your words, but I hear your body telling me another story. What's the story inside your body that's going on right now? And I get it, because that's a very vulnerable thing that's hard to do in the flow of your day. But we all need those places and spaces where I can tell my story that my body is carrying. And that creates that environment for healing and growth.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. I'm a big fan of Brene Brown, and I'm a big fan of what she has kind of talked about on her platform around vulnerability and being able to kind of look into somebody else's eyes and kind of, reveal what's really going on. And I know I would say that as a whole, women don't struggle in this area as probably as much as men do. But I'm starting to hang around guys that are willing to be a lot more. What I'm seeing is that guys are a lot more willing in safe spaces to kind of share what they're going through. I work out with a bunch of guys. Shout out to the folks from F3 with Faith, Family, and Fellowship, Faith, Fitness, and Fellowship. But it's a workout group. It's a free workout. We have locations all over the world, for that matter. It started in North Carolina, but we have several sites here in Northwest Arkansas. And so I wake myself up at ungodly hours of the morning to go work out with these men, and we end in a circle of trust. And that's where guys share what they're struggling with, whether it's a porn addiction or something like that, or just, having bad thoughts or anything like that, or just going through, or there's a sickness in the family or anything along those lines. And I have found it to be a very healthy place where, just 10, 15 years ago, you didn't see programs like that, because everything that guys typically do is around an event or some type of performance or some type of activity. And this is a place where it was kind of built into the fabric of it. Hey, we want to have a circle of trust. Just those 3 words, circle of trust. I mean, it makes a big difference. And so I have shared that stuff with these guys, and, we always kind of look out for each other. So you get text messages from folks that you work out with on a regular basis. And, I just think that there needs to be more of that.
I got to look this up.
No, well, yeah, and I'm gonna invite you to definitely come out and work out. But F3 is a great. I'm actually gonna try to have these guys on the podcast at some point, because I do think the mission of F3 is great, and they actually have a female version of it too. But it was, again, created by a bunch of men, former military guys in North Carolina, that just wanted to have a way to get together on a regular basis and work out without necessarily having to go to a gym. And so we work out outdoors no matter what. The only time we don't work out is in lightning. So we've worked, it was 14 degrees early one morning on Centennial over there down south of town. And the wind was whipping up and it was cold, but we were out there working out. So, we just do what you got to do. Snow, still working out. So that's the one thing about it. And I think there's something to be said for that. And the other thing that's and I'll end with this. The other thing that's I really like about the group is that you leave no man behind. So it's not the kind of workout where, like CrossFit, and this is no shade against CrossFit, but you go into CrossFit, you're trying to get a record. You're trying to do whatever you do in CrossFit as far as working out is concerned, get the most reps or whatever. This isn't like that. Yeah, it's a workout. I'm drenched with sweat when I'm done, but we also are very mindful about those that are with us, and we always tell people to modify as needed, and we never leave anybody behind. So if somebody's a little slower than everybody else, there's always a bunch of guys that circle back around and catch that person up. And it's not like, well, come on, keep going. It's like, no, we got you. We're right here with you. And
that sense of togetherness, what we kind of call that in mental health terms, is called co-regulation,
right,
or co-burdening.
Yeah.
And so there's something powerful to that. And there's also a part I will speak to for Northwest Arkansas that, I'm thinking about that person that may be of a minority status coming to Northwest Arkansas. That was hard for us when we first got here, where, once again, like I like what you keep saying, there's nothing perfect, but there is a very welcoming environment. But it can be hard when you see very few of you, because there's a part of your brain, and the human brain just automatically is always scanning the environment to ask a couple questions. Am I safe? And do I belong? And particularly, do I belong is still a form of safety. And so that was a hard thing for us. There was very few Black and brown faces in Northwest Arkansas. And now that has grown. But I will say, it's still growing in that way. And it could be hard. So I just want to give you that permission. If you come here and you're like, well, I heard Randy, I heard James talk about this place, but I just don't see anyone like me. And your brain's going to want to wonder sometimes, do I belong? And that could be a hard question. And it's still a journey that happens anytime you're a minority in a majority space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's real talk. And certainly I have encountered people that have said that to me, that have been here and then decided to leave for one reason or another. And I think that, well, first of all, it's just from a numbers perspective. Yeah, we're definitely a minority in terms of numbers. I want to say African Americans make up less than 4% of the population of Arkansas, which is around 3.1 or 3.3 million people. So you do the math. Mm-hmm. I don't do public math, but you do the math from there. So But the bottom line is there's not a lot. And it's interesting to see, and I love it with my Latinx brothers and sisters because their community is growing hugely here. And so there's hope. And so what I have encouraged people, and I talk to all my friends that are all my Howard alumni folks, and they're like, why are you living in Northwest Arkansas? And I'm like, you just got to come. You just got to visit and see for yourself. And we had a group of minority mountain bikers that have come here several years now. And they started out with just like 15, 20 folks. Now they got like 200 people coming. And because, of course, we are like the mountain bike capital of the world now. And I'm putting that out there with some pride.
All right.
But it's great to see that these folks do that and come and experience what this area is all about, because I'd like to see more people come and stay and make us. I mean, because I think the one thing about Northwest Arkansas that's really going to set us up for success long term is the diversity of our community.
Yeah. Because every group that comes here adds another flavor and essence to our community. And so I'm just thankful for that. And I love seeing it. I was out in Vegas and training, and my wife, she's talking, I'm hearing her. She just sounds so happy. And she's like, I found pupusas. And she was up in Springdale. And she's like, it is so good. And that just did something for her Caribbean heart. To have pupusas.
Yeah.
So.
Where was this place?
I cannot remember.
Okay. So pupusas in Springdale.
Oh,
so.
Yeah. She could tell you. She was so happy.
Yeah. And that's funny with my wife her family being from the West Indies, from Trinidad specifically. She's always looking for some roti or curry, this or that. Of course, she can make it all. I mean, she can burn. So she's really good as far as that's concerned. But, there's always an opportunity for some new cuisine to be introduced here. And slowly but surely, we're getting those different opportunities. And then we've got like places like Asian Amigo up in Springdale where you can get all of the different ingredients that you need to cook, whether you're cooking Asian, whether you're cooking Latinx food, it just doesn't matter, whatever you're trying to cook. So there's all kinds of options for you.
I love that you keep doing that, Randy. I think that's the part, like sometimes for minority-led businesses, what can be the hard thing to overcome is to get a public platform, to be seen and to be heard. And how you just keep rolling out all these names, even though they're not here in the room.
Right.
I mean, that's a part of like, just so our community, it's not just even for them. It's so what I think about even with part of what I also do is sometimes I go and do trainings or consultations, what's called healing conversations within organizations, whatever. But what you're doing is you're giving the community an opportunity. It's not just about doing it out of forced compulsion to like do this racial work. You're saying like, hey, here's an opportunity to go and see and meet someone who could enrich your life. It's not also just you doing something for them.
Yeah.
They have something to teach and offer you. And that's where we get better as a community.
Yeah. Well, that, and I always say, and it's my little saying, and it's an old saying, I don't know where it came from, but it's a pitiful frog that doesn't praise its own pond. And if you don't, you know what I'm saying? And if like, because like you hear people say, and some folks will badmouth a place. And I'm like, well, if you're in that space, and that's how you feel, then you really do need to think about finding a new resting place. And I get it, and it's so funny because I've even talked to people that are longtime people that have lived here for forever. They've seen everything. And, they say, yeah, a lot of things have changed. And some people bemoan some of the changes because change is scary. And I think for any of us, change is scary, right? And we all process it differently. For some of us, I can think of a lifelong Northwest Arkansan that's probably looking at things and like, man, this is not the same Business 71 that I remember growing up as a child. Man, I can remember riding the pig trail to go wherever, or making that windy trip to Little Rock in 5.5 hours that's now less than 3 hours because of the Bobby Hopper Tunnel. And, everything has changed and nothing will ever stay the same. One day we may look back and be like, yeah, I can remember Northwest Arkansas before there was a monorail here. And I'm just calling those things that aren't as though they are, right? Because one of my big issues is public transportation is always going to be a challenge. And it's always going to impact a certain segment of every community. I don't care whether you're black or white. There's a lot of folks that don't have cars or don't have reliable transportation. And I think if nothing else, before we grow too much, having some type of true regional transit. And yes, a bus could be a part of that. But I think the real part would be building a foundational piece of transit that can take us north to south from just below the Missouri line down to like West Fork or somewhere down there, just as, because you think of as this whole area expands. And I was looking at where my brother-in-law lives. My wife was telling me where he's staying, and it's a place in Austin. And for those of you that remember Austin or Austin, like I remember Austin before South by Southwest. And then Austin has changed, 100% changed. And it has not kept up with the growth that they're experiencing. And everybody and their mother's moving down there. Elon Musk is down there. Apple has a small campus down there. Everybody is moving, doing something in Texas, primarily in that Austin region. And it's a beautiful area, but man, I got to tell you, it's like my brother-in-law lives out east of Austin because that was the only place he could really afford to find a place. It's gotten so expensive that, that may be coming for us to the point where people are going to be like, yeah, I'm living in Harrison, or I'm living like, in Madison County because I can't afford to live in Washington or Benton County. And so,
but then if you have to do that, then what the thing, I was on the board for Accelerate Foundation. One thing we would say, and I've also picked it up from Potter's House, then if you have to do that, then you're just one dead battery away. For some of those people, they're one dead battery away from homelessness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if they lose their car, they lose access to the job,
everything,
resources,
everything,
kids' education. Whew.
Yeah. And that's why I say, and again, it's not a warning sign. It's just we have to be highly considerate of regional transit and how we do that. And that's one of the things that I think organizations like Urban Land Institute of Northwest Arkansas, and you mentioned Accelerate and the Northwest Arkansas Council, very, very aware of some of our shortcomings in those areas. And if we really want to be the heartland, and this key word, that first operative word is heart, we need to be able to create conduits where we're flowing everywhere and not just one place. Right. I
think you just got some more swag right there.
There we go. Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I'm thinking of all kinds of swag, but I think that's really, really important for us to be able to, just be something for everybody here in Northwest Arkansas, not just for the folks that can afford to live in certain areas of this place. Because, again, I think we're writing as we are building. And it's going to take a while for us to get all these things right. But there are enough conversations that are happening nowadays for us to really be thinking holistically about what we want this place to be by 2040, 2045, when we're supposed to be 1 million people.
And I mean, that's even a struggle we're having in the mental health field, to be honest. Mental health services aren't even really matching the growth in this area.
Right.
So, I mean, to try, if a client needs to be hospitalized and need a psychiatrist, that's hard.
Yeah.
Have fun finding a bed.
Yeah.
Even when, I don't know how long ago you did that interview with Brandy, but even now she talked about if you find a therapist, availability is still an issue.
Yep.
It's still an issue. Like, I feel bad. Like, people like, I was recommended to see you, James. I'm like, yeah, I can't. So our areas, we're still even trying to figure out. And one thing I do appreciate about Northwest Arkansas is that we are entrepreneurial in our hearts. And so we're going to find a way to get it done. Whether I think this podcast is a help, just to help people feel seen and heard and understood in that way. And I know the KUF has several podcasts, and I know some of the people on the billet here, and whether it's Resilient Black Women and what they're doing, and just
the R Word, District 9. I mean, there's all kinds of really good podcasts coming out of here. So
exactly, because those do something, and you're right, those do something to the psyche of people, and psyche really meaning the word soul. It does something to the soul of people to hear conversations, especially with, I would say, what's happening in some of our major media. That also does something to the psyche of people. Yeah. I can see the distrust people have for one another, where words are scrutinized at a whole new high level. Some I get it, and some of it is just really the distrust now in the human heart. Like, what do you really mean? What are your intentions towards me? Are you friend or are you foe?
Yeah.
Are you trying to destroy me? Or are you trying to help me? So I just really appreciate this space.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. So before we close out, I did have a question for you, because I hear this all the time, and I know people have questions or thoughts about this, and not that I need you to necessarily judge another form or type of counseling, but better health or better help? Is it better health?
I can't remember either.
Okay. So the bottom line is, and I just want your thoughts, because I know that it has kind of come on the scene. It is an online therapy or online counseling program. What are your thoughts about it? And what is this? How are traditional counselors viewing that?
Well, I'm gonna apply what you just said about, people kind of disparaging certain areas. And what I mean by that is I want to honor what it might serve for some people. And for some people who maybe are financially challenged, transportation challenged, and they're just so fearful. Like literally for some people, what they struggle with, I mean, the phobia of even just stepping outside their door. Better Health might be a platform that saves their life or Better Health. And so I want to honor it for that part. I do also have cautions and concerns. I don't know about their vetting process for therapists on the other end, as far as qualifications. Not saying I'm sure they have to be licensed people, I would hope, right? But also, I would say nothing really replaces. This is me. I've been trying to think about this. During the pandemic, I think I did good online therapy as best we could. Mm-hmm. But I could tell you the emotional energy is just different when you physically sit across from me and I look you in the eyes and you look me in the eyes and you can feel one another's presence in the room. The level of vulnerability does change some. But there is also benefit to the telehealth, I will say. It was something for me to be able to see into the homes of my clients, to sometimes see their kids run through the session, or to see their pets. And how many pets, like when people were doing their sessions, you would see like the dog and the cat at the moment the owner was so vulnerable.
Right.
They would come to comfort them. And I was like, even if you're telling me you're all right, I think your pet is telling me that they're concerned about you.
Yeah.
Can we pay attention right here?
Yeah.
And so there's that benefit. So I just want to say, like, I want to honor the spectrum of different services. Yep. But I would say, please, knowing your therapist, having that intimate relationship. And for me, this is when I will be I'm being nice and validating, but this is when I'm going to draw a hard line on. I want a therapist that works with me from the bottom up, not the top down. And for most people, probably don't go into counseling services needing people to teach them. And that's okay. There's some good psych ed type stuff to talk through. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I'm looking at the library card. A library card is a whole lot cheaper than a therapist.
Yeah.
And so if it's something that people can read and learn, but for me, when people are stuck in emotional and relational distress, I think a good therapist comes beside you in the place of pain and stuckness and works with you from your place of pain and works upwardly, up from your body and your deep experience into your head versus trying to go into your head. And you can do some of that, but that's not where for most of the clients I see, no matter what the issue is, it's more of when they get emotionally flooded, they're not able to navigate the world the same way.
Right.
Their best thinking doesn't work when they're emotionally flooded. So that's why I join clients in the place where they get flooded and can't do what they would normally do. So if someone like on Better Health and there's a therapist out there that can be on Better Health and do that kind of work, great.
Yeah.
I think you just have to do a whole lot more searching, right? Mm-hmm. To when you think like if you go somewhere and there's just like a bunch of chain restaurants or something like that, to find that exquisite cuisine is going to be a little bit harder because everybody might just be popping up something just to hurry up and serve something quick and fast.
Yeah.
And to find that kind of like, whoa, no, there's something different about this pupusa right here.
Sure.
Right? Thing on Better Health, maybe you have to kind of search for, wow, this is it here.
Okay. So if people listening to this are like, man, I like where James is coming from. I'd love to connect with him or the Joshua Center. What's the best way for people to do that?
Definitely for the Joshua Center, if you want to connect with us, you can go to thejoshuacenter.com to get our phone number and email address. If you want to try and get in, definitely give us a call. And probably what's going to happen, you're going to tell the front desk about what you want to come in for. They're going to be thinking through who's the best fit and who's available.
Right.
As far as for me, my client waiting list is long, but I would say people can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at DocHawkLPC. A lot of what I do is directed towards therapists. I do a podcast called The Leading Edge in Emotionally Focused Therapy, but that's really directed towards clinicians mainly. It's so
we'll put a link to that on the show notes so people can find it.
There's one, I did a podcast, Randy, but we didn't keep up with it, but it was aimed at the business community. We called it The Leading Edge, Transforming Leadership Through Attachment Science.
Oh, wow.
It's still out there. We haven't made any new episodes.
I'll get a link to that as well so people can check that out.
But that'll be a great one I think we designed that one to care for business leaders, but also to equip business leaders with what we know as counselors on how to help lead and manage their teams from a human-centered standpoint.
Right. Yeah, I love that. That's perfect. Well, man, listen, when you're not helping people heal, and you're not working on yourself and the family, what do you guys like to do in your spare time when you have have a little bit of extra time here in Northwest Arkansas?
Man, my girls are in sports. My daughters are gearing up for track season right now. So we're going to be at, they train on Fayetteville High School's track. We like to go to Kessler. I'm hoping to get back on the trails on my bike again.
Okay.
Man, me and my wife, our favorite place, like when we just like, man, we have not connected with each other. We get up early in the morning. We end up at Farmer's Table.
Okay.
Man, great food.
Very good food.
Great people. Like it feels like you walk in and know the people know you, you know?
Yeah.
Man, those are some of our things right there. We definitely end up at Feed and Folly sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's some good food. And I've run into your wife on more than one occasion at Ozark Natural Foods. So,
yes.
So shout out.
She used to know all the baristas and who made what drink the best.
Absolutely. So shout out to them and certainly to her. And I'm going to just put it out there that you haven't had kale until you've had some of Nicola's kale, because I still have fond memories of that kale. But no, absolutely. I really appreciate you, James, coming on and sharing with me. This was a very rich conversation, and one that we're just going to put a comma on, not a period. So we'll continue this, and I'm going to figure out how we can do that. But I hope that you guys have continued success. Mm-hmm. And I hope that there's just a number of brand new therapists and counselors beating down your door to join what you guys are doing at the Joshua Center, because Lord knows we need it. Mm-hmm. And, there are a lot of industries where we need more people. Mm-hmm. And in the therapy area, counseling areas, there is just a real need. So, yeah. So I wish you guys nothing but continued success.
And I wish the same on this podcast. Really do. Thank you for all you're doing.
I appreciate that. Well, folks, there you have it. Another episode of the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast. I hope you enjoyed this special episode. This is part of our Transplant series. Got a chance to sit down and chop it up with Dr. James Hawkins, and just some really great information. I would certainly encourage you to do two things for me. If you know somebody that's wants to move here, and they want to get a flavor for what this area is all about, I can't think of a better conversation to share than this one. If you know somebody that's currently struggling right now, and they need to sit down and talk with somebody, this is also a good episode to share with them, so that they know that they're not alone and that there are options out there. And I certainly want to encourage you to do that. But to learn more about us, or to read or download the show notes from today's episode, visit IamNorthwestArkansas.com. You can listen to this podcast and sign up for our free newsletter to keep up with us and all things NWA. Sign up today. You can follow the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast wherever you listen to it. Just click that little follow button and you'll get notified every time there's a new episode, whether it's a normal episode that comes out every Monday or a bonus episode. And please, please, please consider rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, because listen, those reviews really help us, and we read each and every one of them. Remember, as I said a second ago, our podcast comes out every Monday, rain or shine. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn. We'll see you back here next week for another new episode of the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast. Peace.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas. Check us out each and every week, available anywhere that great podcasts can be found. For show notes or more information on becoming a guest, visit IamNorthwestArkansas.com. We'll see you next week on I Am Northwest Arkansas.